Welcome to the MZ Burning Glass Employment Situation Live Analysis. Each month, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics providing their jobs report as just one indicator to better understanding the health of our labor force and our economy. On this May 6, 2022, I'm your host, Christopher Laney, and I am joined by two MZ Burning Glass economists, Senior Labor Economist Ron Hetrick and Senior Labor Economist Rucha Bankudre. Ron, Rucha, welcome.
Thank you. Welcome to you.
It's good to have you. It just came out 30 minutes ago. So again, we're jumping in. Ron, I'm going to start with you. Just what are your initial thoughts on the report of what you're seeing?
You know, I think where hiring was kind of in line with expectations. Where I could say I was a little shocked is the fact that we are waiting for this labor force to come back. And instead of getting this gain that, I thought was going to start materializing in the second quarter, we saw a significant, almost 500,000 drop of people who dropped out of our labor force. And we did see, that commensurate gain in people who identify as not being in the labor force. So, we're seeing these employment gains, and you look at an overall number like 430,000 jobs and you think, hey, that sounds really good, but it's not really good. I mean, we still have such a huge deficit of jobs. We're still dealing with, record levels of job openings. 400,000 when you have 11.5 million job openings just isn't going to cut it.
Yeah, Rucha, there were, gains in pretty much all industries, but specifically one of the areas that we noticed was leisure and hospitality, and seeing the gains specifically in that industry. Is this a sign towards that industry recovering? Because it's one of the few that haven't fully recovered from pre-pandemic levels.
Yeah, I think that's, definitely exactly right. I think something we see that really supports that point is that the number of teleworking, right, is now down, and the number who are out of work because of COVID has come down about 1 million people. So at this point, I do really think those industries are starting to recover from COVID, and hopefully, will continue to stay that way. Other major industries we saw that had, the largest increases were also education and healthcare, and then some in manufacturing as well.
That's positive too. Healthcare also being one of those industries that has yet to recover from that pre-pandemic level. Ron, you've had some commentary recently and some discussion around construction and manufacturing. You've had some concern. I was hoping that maybe you could elaborate on some of the concerns you've had specifically among those two industries.
Yeah, something really bothersome in this report today is if you look at the number of people who in construction or manufacturing. So the way that BLS asked it is, what was your last job? And those number of people who say they are unemployed, you're talking about almost historical record low numbers in both of those industries. Construction is dying for workers, and yet they had a 2,000 gain. I mean, almost no gain last month at a time that we all know that there's an incredible housing shortage. This is an industry that is absolutely starved for workers. Manufacturing, same thing. You're dealing with like 800,000 openings, and yet when we look at that overall number of unemployed people, it's like 300,000. We just simply don't have the people to fill the types of jobs in these two industries. So if we start to talk about, even if we were to get these goods in from China, like if we were to solve our supply chain issue, the amount of people that are working in these companies is probably not enough to get everything kind of moving again.
You talk in the beginning briefly about labor force participation dropping, and yet there is literally jobs everywhere. What do you believe is happening? Why? You talk about this is no longer a situation, a crisis on those that are unemployed, but really unengaged. What is it going to take to engage?
I tell you what, you may miss this in this release today, and it's something that absolutely jumps off the page. When we look at this drop in the labor force, this over 500,000 drop in our labor force, almost all of that came from people who do not have a college degree of any kind. We're talking about people who only have a high school diploma. If you look at our job openings, these 11.5 million job openings, about 7 million of those are for people working in services level jobs, lower skilled jobs, whether it be manufacturing, construction, retail, restaurants. So to see these people as the ones who are disengaging, not even looking for work, despite all of these pay increases that we've had, right? We're seeing pay increases going up. All we talk about is inflation. Inflation's eating into, well, who's going to feel inflation more than anyone? People who probably make, lower levels of income. Yet those are the people that we're seeing who look like they're kind of disengaging from the labor force. This is just a very confusing picture.
Yeah, Rucha, I want to similar topic. Inflation is playing a huge role in our economy right now. and people's dollars are being stretched. With the war on talent, are people benefiting from making more money? Where were the indicators in this specific report? What are we seeing?
Sure. So, I mean, we are still seeing increases slightly in wage, but the problem is that they're just not keeping up with inflation. So, this month we saw an increase of about 10 cents per hour on hourly wage. That's a little bit lower than it was last month at 13 cents per wage, 13 cents. But the real problem here is that, it's only a 5.5% increase overall in the past 12 months. And the prices and everything are just increasing so much more than that, right? Like if you look at the CPI, that's really up, 8.5%. So these wages are increasing, it looks like, but not really in real earnings for people.
Yeah, Ron, I want to come back to you. I want to stay on this topic for just a second because I know that this is a lot of people are interested in this, the combination between wages and inflation, and are individuals just better off in general? And as Rusha, you just said, we're not necessarily better off. But one of the key indicators this week, earlier I saw that in industries like leisure and hospitality, we're seeing nearly an 8% increase for wages in that industry, and specifically for those that don't have a college degree. But Ron, you just mentioned that that's the population group that's disengaged from the workforce, the labor force.
It is so many things to unpack here. First off, you have, the Fed is doing tightening action. We saw a kind of a decline in GDP. We have a tightening action, and a lot of people might be sitting there saying, we still have kind of this labor crisis. We can't fill these jobs. Why would we, trying to make sense of why are we tightening? And it's kind of, these things are all tied together. Inflation is really eating away at earnings. So the Fed's trying to get this under control so that the wage increases that we're getting will mean more. As long as inflation is outpacing these wage gains, people, you can make more and make more. And if you think about, just mention an industry like restaurants and hotels, well, who makes the least? If I look at industries who made the least amount overall in average hourly earnings, it's those industries. So them seeing the biggest gain, that's great, but they're also the ones who are by far most impacted by the kinds of inflation that we're seeing, especially things like food inflation or even fuel inflation. Any of those product inflation things are going to hit people who are making those earnings numbers way more than they're going to affect the rest of the population. But I'm still confused as to why we're not seeing them engaging more, because there's also no indication that they're necessarily if they're leaving, like what's happening there? How are we surviving in this case?
Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up question, is how are people paying their bills if you're disengaged from the workforce, especially among some of maybe the lower skilled individuals and in the occupations they're traditionally in? How are they surviving?
Credit card debt. If you look at the credit card debt line, it's going straight up. We have credit card debt lines going up. We have savings account numbers going straight down. For some reason, people are still finding a way of making this work. And it's frustrating. I think as someone, as all of us who want to see, the labor market healthy and taking off, seeing people kind of disengage and knowing now that we're seeing some indications that it has nothing to do with COVID, it's like, now you have to start to think, well, what is it that's impacting things out there? And I got to say right now, as it stands here today in May, I don't have a clue, as I really thought we were going to start to see a much bigger increase in our labor force. Instead of seeing an increase, we got a decrease. I mean, this is going to be hard to explain.
Quickly, I just want to ask this question: is to recover our labor force, what are the numbers that we need? I know you talk about we have 11.5 million job openings. We added 400 in this report, over 400,000 jobs. What does that recovery look like? How many jobs do we need?
Well, as of last month, we were 175,000 away from being back to where we were pre-pandemic. That's crazy. We don't even have the labor force from pre-pandemic. Now with this step back of about 500,000, now we're 700,000 away from just having the labor force that we had prior to the pandemic. But you have to understand something. Our population's been growing during this time. So we actually need several million, almost like 3 million, over 3 million people to go back to work to service the amount of population that we have right now. So we definitely don't want to be chasing that number even more like we're doing right now. I mean, I was hoping that we would start to gain on that. So very disappointing.
Rusha, in the JOLTS report that we had earlier this week, 11.5 million jobs. We've mentioned it multiple times here. Do we believe that that is an indication that the openings are peaking, or do we think that's going to continuously grow and we just can't fill those jobs?
I mean, honestly, I think we had thought that had peaked back at the end of 2021. And I think everyone was kind of expecting things to at least slow down a little bit, if not level out. And we just have not seen that happening. So it's not really clear that I don't feel confident saying that that's the peak just because we've said that before and been wrong. So I think, there's those jobs are still there and we just don't have the people to fill them.
Arusha, I'm gonna go to you for your final 3 takeaways on the report.
Yeah, so I think the main takeaways here are really as Ron said that the labor force fell a little bit. There was no change in unemployment. Things are looking better in terms of teleworking and people are not out of work as a result of COVID. But this is really not solving our problems in that we have all these jobs. Employment is not going up as much as we really would like it to. And wages are increasing, but just not keeping up with inflation at all.
Ron, is today's report good news or bad news? And what should we be looking for going forward?
I don't think there's any way of spinning any good news out of this report. We would want to have either have seen a large gain in hires. We didn't get that. A lot of people weren't expecting us to necessarily get a huge gain. Certainly expected the labor force numbers to improve. We thought more people would start heading back. I mean, there's been people talking about people unretiring and they're, just this, inflation is going to drive people back to work. You see these headlines everywhere. It didn't. It actually did. It seems somehow it seemed to have done the opposite. And I think that this is really concerning for what we're going to see, when the April JOLTS report comes out. I don't know if we can say that we've made any headwinds on hiring that's going to meaningfully impact these job openings numbers.
Ron, Arusha, it's always a pleasure. For those of you watching, if you want to get more information on our full analysis, visit mzbg.com. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next month.